Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Daybreak, South Korea says any decision on the possible deployment of a US missile defense system is its to make alone, amid growing outside pressure from China and the US. In a rare meeting, President Park Geun-hye calls on the leaders of Korea's rival political parties to get behind her drive to revive the sluggish economy. Plus, Israelis flock to the polls with signs showing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's ruling Likud party could be in for a close race. Daybreak begins now. Hello and thanks for joining us. To our viewers around the world, it's 6 a.m. on Wednesday, March 18th here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broome and you're tuned in to Daybreak. Our top story this morning, South Korea is calling on third parties to stay out of its domestic security affairs after China and the US made their feelings clear this week about where they stand on the possible deployment of a US missile defense system to the Korean peninsula. Our Hwang Sang-hee reports.
Just a day after China voiced concerns over the possible deployment of a THAAD missile defense system in South Korea, the United States said China doesn't have a say in the matter.
Well, I find it curious that a third country would presume to make strong representations about a security system that has not been put in place and that is still a matter of theory.
Chinese Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs Liu Zhenchao told reporters in Seoul on Monday that China hopes South Korea will consider Beijing's concerns before deploying the US-led missile defense system. Beijing is against the deployment over concerns that the radar system, which can cover 1,000 kilometers, could be used to monitor mainland China. But following talks with senior South Korean officials in Seoul on Tuesday, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Daniel Russell said THAAD is purely for countering North Korean threats and that its deployment is up to South Korea.
It is for the Republic of Korea to decide what measures it will take in its own alliance defense and when.
South Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se echoed Russell's words while speaking to reporters, but added there were no official talks about THAAD deployment.
As for THAAD, there is currently no development. The government will consider all factors, including security, before reaching a decision that will maximize our national interest.
But as the foreign ministry teeters between Seoul's closest partners, the defense ministry was much more blunt, saying that neighboring countries should not weigh in on South Korea's security policy. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
North Korea has had its say on the possible missile deployment, blaming the US for stoking tensions on the Korean peninsula. North Korea's ruling Workers' Party newspaper, the Nodong Shinmun, said on Tuesday that Washington is trying to become a main strategic power in the Asia-Pacific region by building up its military presence. And in another diplomatic maneuver for South Korea this week, the question of whether to join a new China-led regional development bank. Signing on will probably mean more infrastructure deals for Korean firms, but it may come at the price of denting Seoul-Washington relations. Connie Kim reports.
China aims to create a new financial order centered around Beijing with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Launched last year, it aims to provide project loans to developing nations and promote economic growth. But the U.S. opposes its establishment as it believes Beijing could use the bank for political purposes. During talks in Seoul on Tuesday, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Daniel Russell conveyed Washington's concerns to senior South Korean officials and called on China to ensure transparency for the new financial institution. Those who take a cautious stance say South Korea joining the AIIB could be a stumbling block in strengthening the South Korea-U.S. alliance because it goes against the U.S.-led Asian Development Bank. Supporters of Korea becoming a founding member of the AIIB say it would be a win for Seoul economically and politically.
Washington and Japan are the biggest shareholders in the Asian Development Bank, so Korea would have very little decision-making power. If South Korea joins the AIIB, Seoul will have a greater chance of participating in infrastructure projects for developing countries in Asia.
Looking ahead, analysts also say Seoul's participation in the bank could help secure stabilization funds and capital for building infrastructure post-reunification. Pundits point out, however, that it's important for Seoul to expand its share in the AIIB to increase its decision-making role. With Korea mulling over whether to join the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, experts here are calling for a diplomatic strategy that doesn't favor either Washington or Beijing, but that's in Korea's best national interest. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, as a follow-up to that report, the United States says it's up to Seoul to decide whether it wants to join the China-led Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. At a regular press briefing on Tuesday, U.S. State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki said the decision is of any sovereign country, including South Korea, to make on the AIIB. Psaki also said it would be important for prospective members of the AIIB to push for the adoption of high standards, adding that Washington believes there's a need to enhance infrastructure investment with the international community. She said the multilateral institution should closely follow the high standards built at the World Bank and the Regional Development Bank. Now, Britain announced last week that it would join the bank, becoming the first Western country to do so. President Park Geun-hye held talks on Tuesday with the leaders of Korea's two main political parties. The three were looking to find some common ground on reviving the nation's flagging economy. However, as you'd expect, there were some differences on some major issues. Our Choi Sun reports.
After a brief exchange of greetings with the leaders of the ruling and opposition parties, President Park got down to business, addressing her recent Middle East trip.
앞으로 이 중동 순방의 결실들이 우리 국민과 또 기업들에게 더 큰 혜택으로 돌아가고 또 그래서 다시 한번 경제가 또 일어나는 어떤 초석이 될 수 있도록
She also urged the parliament to swiftly pass pending bills aimed at creating jobs and revitalizing the economy. While promising his party's cooperation, opposition leader Moon Jae-in said that the government's economic and welfare policies have failed to improve the people's livelihood.
We need to change policies and increase household income for growth. I propose first addressing 4 livelihood tasks.
The 4 tasks Moon listed were a significant increase in Korea's minimum wage, generating welfare funding by expanding taxes on corporations and high-income earners, and addressing the problems of rising housing rental prices and household debt. President Park rebutted Moon's claims, saying the opposition's proposed artificial income increase could lead to more taxes and reduce corporate activity. She added the government is already taking measures to handle the 4 tasks listed by the opposition leader. As for improving inter-Korean relations, Moon said Seoul should first seek to boost economic cooperation with Pyongyang and make efforts to hold an inter-Korean summit this year. While President Park has opened a channel to more actively communicate with the leaders of both the ruling and opposition parties, time will tell how Tuesday's meeting will affect state affairs down the road. Choi Yu-sun, Arirang News.
Now, gone are the days when candidates campaigned with posters, leaflets and trucks with loud hailers. Now they are jumping on the social media bandwagon to try and draw in potential young supporters. Our Kwon So-ah takes a look at the new digital look for Korea's political leaders.
As Korea's rival parties gear up for April's by-elections, they're trying to win the hearts of young voters through novel campaign methods than the usual posters and leaflets. This teaser shows a young unemployed man complaining about a situation, when suddenly the ruling Saenuri Party's chairman appears in front of him.
괜찮아요. 많이 놀랬죠?
It's an advertisement for an application naming contest. It's hoped the app will boost young people's participation in the political process. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy is using webtoons as a means of explaining hot political issues in an easy-to-digest way.
We're doing this in an effort to not let complicated policies be discussed only at the National Assembly, but to connect with young voters.
Due to high social network service penetration, these video clips and digital comics spread quickly, making it easier for the parties to spread their vision to the younger generation. But there are concerns about whether this is the best way to go about campaigning.
When young people look at content on SNS or webtoons, they simply enjoy it and they don't take it that seriously. That's why there needs to be a more thorough understanding of cultural phenomena and young people's opinions, especially when the subject matter is so heavy and important.
Some say that rather than focusing too much on how to make themselves more likable, the parties should come up with practical strategies to tackle the biggest problems facing young people in Korea, such as the high youth unemployment rate. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Now, South Korean authorities have accused North Korea of being behind the recent hack attacks on South Korea's nuclear power plants. An interim probe by local authorities found that malicious codes used in the cyber attacks were similar to those used by North Korea in the past, and that they originated from IP addresses in the north. Pyongyang, though, through its main propaganda website, has denied any involvement in the hacking. Last week, the hackers claimed to have leaked documents about the nuclear facilities in the past, released additional files, and demanded money in return for not selling the information to other countries. 15 South Korean businessmen with factories at the Inter-Korean Kaesong Industrial Complex are heading to the zone this morning for a meeting with some North Korean representatives. An official from Seoul's foreign ministry says the businessmen plan to discuss North Korea's recent decision to unilaterally raise workers' wages and call for a solution to the issue. This follows the North's notification that it wanted to hold a briefing session on their revised labour regulation. The South Korean government told more than 120 company heads on Tuesday that they should not comply with the North's unilateral decision on wages. The top UN official on North Korean human rights is demanding a comprehensive investigation into claims North Koreans are being sent abroad in droves to work in slave-like conditions to earn much-needed foreign currency for the regime. Our Shin Se-min reports.
The United Nations human rights investigator for North Korea said he will look into allegations that 20,000 North Koreans are working in slave-like conditions in countries like China, Russia, and the Middle East. Marzuki Daruzman, the UN Special Rapporteur on North Korea, told Reuters the workers are, quote, bonded laborers or slave laborers who receive poor compensation for working long hours. NK Watch, a Seoul-based human rights group, says roughly 100,000 workers are sent overseas to 40 countries and make some $3 billion in foreign currency every year for the Kim Jong-un regime. There was no reason given for the discrepancy in the estimated numbers of workers. The human rights group also called for an investigation into host countries' involvement in the program. This isn't the first time the practice has surfaced. Activists say North Korea has been using its manpower to make money for the Kim regime since the 1980s, with some of the money being spent on luxury goods. But the practice has been accelerating under the current leadership as the number of North Korean workers abroad is said to have increased by 35,000 since 2012, based on figures from the New York Times and NK Watch. Activists say the practice may have increased because of tighter international sanctions on the regime that have prompted it to seek new sources of revenue. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, the growth forecast for the South Korean economy seems to be dimming with each and every report that comes out, with domestic consumption not recovering and indicators all pointing to a slowing economy. Korea is likely to log a sixth consecutive quarter of 0% range growth in the first 3 months of this year. Song Ji-son reports.
It's barely managing to hover above zero. The Korean economy is likely to log another 0% range growth for a sixth straight quarter, inching closer to a 9-quarter record logged between 2011 and 2013. Oil prices may be cheap, but domestic consumption is not catching up, and real economic indicators are showing the telltale signs of a slowing economy. Mining and manufacturing production shrunk at the fastest rate in 6 years in January, and consumer inflation is also hovering at the 0% range for the third straight month. If the first quarter marks expansion of less than 1%, the Korean economy is likely to settle in the low 3% growth range for the whole of 2015. Foreign investment banks have already downwardly revised their outlook, with some predicting growth in the 2% range. Domestic research institutes are also reportedly ready to adjust their figures. After slashing the key interest rate to an all-time low of 1.75% last week, Korea's central bank also hinted that its 3.4% growth outlook will be downgraded in its next forecast in April. Song Ji-son, Arirang News.
Now, having a good university degree can often help you get ahead in the world of work, but that's not always the case when it comes to getting a job in Korea, unfortunately. New research shows more college grads are out of work compared to those who ended their education after high school. While the unemployment rate for high school graduates dropped 0.2 percentage points from 2005 to around 9% last year, the rate rose for college grads from 6% to nearly 10%. Analysts attribute the trend to the decreasing number of quality white-collar jobs that college graduates tend to go after. Time now for a look through the global headlines we're following on this Wednesday morning from Seoul. For that, we connect to our news center, where our Eunice Kim is following the developments for us. Good morning, Eunice.
And good morning to you, Mark. Millions of Israelis have cast their ballots and are now anxiously awaiting to see whether Benjamin Netanyahu will clinch a fourth term to become the country's longest-running prime minister. Exit polls show the race is neck and neck between Netanyahu's Likud party taking 28 seats and his main rival Isaac Herzog's center-left Zionist Union securing 27 in the Knesset. This means the winning party will need to work with other parties in the 120-member Israeli parliament to form a majority coalition government before the prime minister is named. Final results are not expected until morning local time. Latest figures from the Central Elections Committee also has voter turnout at 65%. Emerging as the key issues in this race are less security issues, as they have been in the past, and more issues relating to the local economy and living standards. Polls ahead of the Tuesday election showed 54-year-old Isaac Herzog catching up to Netanyahu's lead. He is a former minister of Housing, Welfare and Social Services, hailing from Israel's powerful and wealthy political dynasty launched by his grandfather, who was chief rabbi of Israel in the 1950s. Returning now to the Asia-Pacific region, Indonesian authorities have called off the search effort for AirAsia Flight 8501 that had dropped off radar late last year. The search had recovered 106 bodies, most of them in or near the wreckage in the Java Sea, but 56 were still unaccounted for. Indonesia's rescue agency said the search would conclude on Tuesday night, and the ships pulled out on Wednesday. Reports say family members holding out for hope were disappointed, but understood the operation could not go on indefinitely. Indonesian investigators have said the plane bound for Singapore from the city of Surabaya was trying to fly above a storm, citing radar data with the less experienced co-pilot at the helm. And finally, scientists in Spain believe they've discovered the remains of the famous author Miguel de Cervantes nearly 400 years after his death. Cervantes is famous for writing the novel Don Quixote, among others. His body had been buried back in 1616, but the exact location of his tomb was lost when the convent was rebuilt. Excavation deep into the subsoil of that 17th century Madrid convent had recently turned up several remains, and scientists say historical, archaeological, and anthropological information points to some of those fragments belonging to the celebrated author.
And a good Wednesday morning to you all as we kick things off with the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Games as the IOC Coordination Commission began its 4 days of review starting on Tuesday. And like it or not, the organizing committee is expecting some negative reviews. Despite some major improvements made in the preparations for the Winter Games, the IOC is expected to give out some negative comments in the current status, including the delay in the constructions. Now, other key issues that will be brought up by the IOC also include whether or not a test event can be launched next February and the lack of sponsors for the Games. But the organizing committee remain optimistic as they have recently formed a joint working committee with the IOC in hopes to speed up the preparations. Now, with Korean national football team head coach Uli Stilicke announcing his latest roster for the upcoming matches this month, nothing's a surprise anymore, which is why no one questioned his latest selections for the national team. Now, on Tuesday, the 61-year-old announced his latest roster and held a brief press conference, stating that the team needs to keep making changes in order to improve, as he added 2 new faces to the 23-man roster. Now, new additions include the 2 midfielders in Kim Eun-sun of the Suwon Samsung Blue Wings and Lee Jae-sung of the Jeonbuk Hyundai Motors. Meanwhile, the Cinderella pick from the Asian Cup, Lee Jung-hyuk, was selected once again as he hopes to continue his success with the national team. Now, another issue brought up by manager Uli Stilicke in the press conference was Chaduri's retirement match, which was set to be on March 31st against New Zealand. And now we can expect that to happen as he confirmed Chaduri's final match. Now, with the KFA scheduled to hold a special ceremony for Chaduri during halftime, manager Uli Stilicke stated that he will start the defender against New Zealand and take him out of the game with 2 to 3 minutes left until halftime so that he can get a huge ovation from the fans. The 61-year-old head coach made it clear it's not just a ceremonial selection and that the veteran deserves a chance to go out in style. Now, basketball fans here in the nation were blessed with a couple of exciting KBL playoff series this past week, and starting tonight, the playoff is going to be kicked up a notch. Now, with Game 1 of the best-of-5 round-of-4 playoff series between the Ulsan Mobis Phoebus and the Changwon LG Sakers tipping off later tonight, expect an intense matchup between the two teams. Well, it's because it's a repeat of last year's championship series where Mobis defeated LG in 6 games to claim their 5th title. But with LG playing a full 5-game series against the Goyang Orions in the first round, fatigue might be an issue against the well-rested Mobis team. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Well, it was dusty Tuesday yesterday, and it's another dusty morning for most parts. But thankfully, we have much needed rain in the forecast for today. Actually, it's raining quite heavily down south, and these rain clouds will gradually move to the entire nation as the day goes on. So southern coastal regions will receive rain of up to 80 millimeters, along with the strong gusty winds. In the meantime, the Seoul and the surrounding areas will see a light precipitation, and this rain clouds will linger till tomorrow morning. But people in the upper parts will not need to wear extra clothing. The readings will be just a tad lower today, as the daytime high here in the capital will rise to 14. But people down south will notice much cooler temperatures, as Daegu and Busan will only rise to 11 and 13 this afternoon. And as for the other regions, it looks like Jeju Island and Daejeon should see a high of 19 and 13, and Dokdo climbs up to 11. Well, that's all for Korea. Be sure to pack an umbrella. And let's take a look at the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's going to do it for now. Have a wonderful day and do stay tuned to Arirang. Goodbye.